so many different kinds of prayer. You know, there's daily mass. There's adoration. You know, I have a friend that called me up and said, Jill, she didn't say, will you take my chapel hour? She said, will you please go adore for me? And then I did a retreat down in Austin, Texas, and this one woman said, ooh, I love to go for adoration. I just love to have that adoration shining on me. And I just, you know, and then I have this one gentleman that goes to work, he rides his bike. And when he goes by the adoration chapel, he gets off his bike, he lays it down, he kneels on the sidewalk outside the adoration chapel, and then he gets up on his bike and then he leaves. I love to see things like that because he's witnessing to me. I'm thinking, now that's someone who loves the Blessed Sacrament. And I really encourage you, if you want peace, if you need peace, just spend time there. There's journaling, there's your rosary, there's the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, there's so many different ways that you can pray. You can pray just by doing good deeds. My husband loves the first Saturday devotion, and he goes to St. Bridget's Church, and he's been doing it ever since we got married. He goes every single first Saturday. And one day he was in there and he was doing his rosary, and there were two ladies in there, and they were changing the books. You know, they were taking the October book out and putting the November book out because it was the first Saturday. And my husband was saying his rosary, and he was getting, like, he would not last in the classroom, believe me. They would, like, tie him up. He was getting so annoyed that these women were making all this racket with the books. You know, they were pulling them out and they were putting them in, and he couldn't concentrate. And one of the ladies went up to him and said, excuse me, sir, but we are praying also. We are praying with our hands. And you know what? It was eye-opening for my husband because she was right. And so what you do with your hands is also a prayer. Now, my mother, who has Alzheimer's, you know, when I wipe that applesauce off her mouth with a paper towel, that paper towel is no different than the cloth of Veronica. So there are just many different ways that you can pray that can bring you peace. Next, I wish to discuss forgiveness and how the lack of it can cause real havoc in our hearts. And this is the time where I have to tell you all that we at St. Bridget's forgive you for taking Father de Tomo away from us. The word forgive appears 42 times in the Old Testament and 33 times in the New Testament. We are commanded to forgive. Jesus was the perfect model of forgiveness. And you know what? When I think that people have trouble forgiving, look at Jesus on the cross, what they were doing to him. They were spitting on him and throwing rocks at him and cursing him. And what did he say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I thought, if he can do that, I can, you know, forgive my whatever little squabble thing I've got going on. Don't let bitterness and resentment find a place in your beautiful heart. When you forgive, you're going to experience freedom. I will tell you a story that I have about forgiveness. I had a little boy, I taught 6th grade, I had a little boy in my class, and he was about this tall. And he was just a naughty, naughty, naughty boy. He was really naughty. And I was right out of college, so I was probably 22 years old, and he had probably been held back a few years, and it was 6th grade, so he was like 13, and I was 22. And I was terrified of him. I was absolutely terrified. I would go home and cry every night. But you know what you can't do is you can't let your students know that, you know, they've got all this power over you. So I waited and waited and waited for this 6th grade year to end, and finally it did, and it was like goodbye to this young boy. Caesar, his name was. And I was so glad to have him out of my life, but it bothered me for all those years that I held that bad feeling in my heart towards him, and I did. It was bad, you know. And I followed him. He, you know, he had to go to jail, and he just was bad. He actually, even when he was in 6th, he took a crayon and wrote on my car. But I was so glad he was out of my life. But it always bothered me that we always had that conflict. So then 30 years later, I'm distributing communion at our hospital, and I see his name on my list. And I cannot tell you what happened to me physically. I started to tremble. I started to, he was at the bottom of my list. And I was just shaking the whole time, and I walked into his room, and I said, "Excuse me, would you like to receive our Lord in the Holy Eucharist?" And he said, "Yes, please." And I said, "Do you know who I am?" And he goes, "I do." He goes, "I remember you. You're Miss Valentine." That was my maiden name. And there was a girl on the end of the bed, and she goes, "Oh my gosh." She goes, "I've heard of you." She said, "Caesar doesn't remember many of his teachers, but he remembers you." And I said, "You know, I don't remember all my students either, but I remember Caesar." And then he said to me, "Before you give me Holy Communion, would you mind if I just told you that I forgive you? I mean, that I ask," he goes, "I ask your forgiveness for everything that I did to you." And I said, "Of course I forgive you, and, you know, I ask that you forgive me too." And it was this beautiful moment where I felt like the Lord was saying, I want you to have this peace. So I am providing this opportunity for you. And it was just a beautiful divine moment, but it was a moment where, you know what, it shows you that forgiveness can really truly set you free. Refusing to forgive causes bitterness in our hearts. Jesus commands us to forgive 70 times, 7 times. It means to forgive and to forgive again and again and again. And finally, forgive yourself. Life is way too short to spend another day at war with yourself. Free yourself from past mistakes. I often heard once that the greatest lesson is your last mistake. I have a friend, her name is Malena, and she always says, "Jill, I'm going to tell you one thing I want you to remember for your whole life. Be true to yourself." And I give you that advice. Be kind to yourself. Be your own best friend. How can you have a quiet heart when someone, like yourself, is mean to you all of the time? Look in the mirror and say, "I love you." Remember what Dr. Seuss said, no one is youer than you. I'd like to close with what I think is the most important way to create a peaceful heart, and fits right in because it's Valentine's Day, but that is love. At the beginning of this talk, I spoke about how the heart represents love. Grow love in your heart. Have so much love in your heart that there's no room for stress, no room for anxiety, no room for jealousy, judgment, bitterness, or blame. I have a wonderful spiritual director who has taught me many things. The most meaningful thing that she has ever taught me is bring love to every situation. Bring love to every situation. My daughter said to me once, we were in Chicago, she goes, "Oh, Mom, you got to take a cab. Get in a cab right now, this great exercise class. You are just going to love it. You got to come, you got to come." So I got in the cab with her, and the cab driver's driving, and he is driving all over Chicago. I don't know like where he is going, and I'm getting so frustrated. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss the Zumba or whatever it was. I'm going to miss it. And finally he stopped, and I said, "How much do I owe you?" And he goes, "Ma'am, you don't owe me anything. It's my first day." And you know what? I all of a sudden didn't care about my exercise class. I felt horrible, and I got out of the cab. I paid him, and I got out of the cab, and he drove away, and when he drove away, I saw a blue diamond cab, number 27. And I ran back to my hotel, and I called Blue Cab Diamond Company or whatever, and I said, "I want to know who the cab driver was for car number 27. He was so great. I never had such a great cab ride ever. I loved the music he played, you know." And you know what? He told Armando, and he said, "Can I have Armando call you back?" So Armando called me back and said, "Oh, ma'am, thank you so much. I just love giving you a cab ride. Anytime you're in Chicago, I will give you a free cab ride, wherever you want to go." But you know what? I took that moment and I brought love to it. I mean, I redeemed myself in the 11th hour, but I turned that around and I brought love to it. You know, you never know what someone is going through. You never know. So just bring love to every situation. You have a choice. You can either bring love or you cannot bring love. There was a song released on April 15th, 1965 by a woman named Jackie DeShannon. The song was called What the World Needs Now Is Love. In 1969, she released another song, Put a Little Love in Your Heart. It's great advice since Jesus commands us to love. In John 13, verses 34 and 35, a new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. I want you to try to picture your heart as a garden. Fill it with flowers of kindness, patience, compassion, and forgiveness. Will weeds of jealousy, bitterness, judgment, and frustration sneak into your garden? You bet they will. But that's why you fill it with as many flowers. I probably should not be the person talking about flowers. Fill it with as many flowers as you can, because that's where the love is. Jesus is love. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in Jesus, the one who loved you first. So let his beautiful, unconditional love quiet your anxious heart. Thank you.